Selene had mapped 100 forgotten roads and charted the bones of 3 dead kingdoms, but she had never seen walls that wept. The Glass Labyrinth rose before her in the perpetual twilight of the veiled reach, its crystalline spires piercing the low mist like the ribs of some buried god. Each wall was a sheet of living glass, not the cold, dead silica of a window pane, but something that breathed, shifted, and reflected light in colors that had no names. Pale greens, the shade of old bruises, deep indigos that swallowed the eye, and everywhere, in every surface, the faint suggestion of movement behind the glass, as though the labyrinth were already dreaming of her. The queen's summons had reached her in a tavern 3 kingdoms away. "Come, cartographer, my daughter vanished within the Glass Labyrinth 7 years ago. The labyrinth does not kill, they say, it simply keeps. Map its corridors, find my heir. You will be paid in the tears of our dead, which in the veiled reach pass for currency." Selene had laughed at that last part. She was not laughing now. At the entrance, a single arch of glass reflected her image back at her, but the reflection did not match. The Selene in the glass was younger, perhaps 20, with unlined eyes and hands that had never drawn a map. This younger Selene held a quill, and she was writing something on parchment, her face tight with concentration. Selene knew the memory at once. She had not thought of it in 15 years. The letter she had written to her father, the one she had never sent because he died before she could. The words had been, "I forgive you." The reflection's quill paused. The younger Selene looked up and met the eyes of the woman standing outside the glass. Her lips moved, and though no sound came, Selene could read them perfectly. "You never said it." She stepped through the arch. The labyrinth was not a maze in the conventional sense. There were no dead ends, no branching corridors that forced a choice. There was only one path, a spiraling descent into the earth, each layer of glass growing thicker, older, more alive. The walls on either side reflected not her current self but her past selves, arranged in chronological order like a gallery of ghosts. The first corridor showed her at 30, standing over a freshly dug grave. Her mentor, the old cartographer Ven, had taught her everything: how to read the land, how to hold a compass steady in a storm, how to believe that any place could be known if you paid enough attention. She had been late to his bedside. She had been mapping the Serpent Delta, and by the time she returned, he was already gone, his last words entrusted to a stranger. The reflection showed her arriving at the grave, rain soaking through her cloak, and the stranger, a young woman with an expression of pity, mouthing the words she had never heard. "He said to tell you the North Star is not as steady as you think." Selene walked on. The glass grew colder. The second corridor showed her at 25, in the burning library of Kael Morath. She had been hired to retrieve a single map from the archives before the siege consumed everything. She had found the map. She had also found a child, a boy of perhaps 7, hiding beneath an overturned table, his eyes wide with terror. The reflection showed her standing in the doorway, the map in one hand, the boy just 10 paces away. The ceiling was already falling. She could have grabbed him. She could have tried. Instead, she had told herself the map was more important, that one child could not possibly matter against the knowledge she was saving. The reflection showed the boy's face as she turned away. His mouth moved. "I was still there when the roof fell." Selene's legs carried her forward, though every step felt heavier now. The glass had begun to pulse, a slow heartbeat that vibrated through the soles of her boots. The third corridor showed her at 18, sitting beside her father's bed. He had been sick for months, a wasting disease that the healers could not name. In the final weeks, he had become cruel. He said things to her that a dying man should never say to his daughter. She had stopped visiting. She had told herself he deserved to die alone. The reflection showed her sitting in a tavern instead, drinking with strangers, laughing at jokes that were not funny, while a candle burned down in a room 3 streets away and her father's hand went still. The reflection's lips formed words she had never allowed herself to hear. "He was still your father, and you were not there." She was running now. The glass walls blurred past her, each one throwing a new accusation, a new shame, a new failure. The labyrinth did not need monsters. The labyrinth had her. She found the heir in the deepest chamber. The princess had been 7 years old when she entered the labyrinth. She was 14 now, a girl on the cusp of womanhood, sitting cross-legged on a floor of polished obsidian glass, staring at her own reflection with an expression of perfect serenity. 7 years of mirrors, 7 years of her own worst memories played back without mercy. The labyrinth had shown her every cruelty she had ever committed, every selfish impulse, every unkind word spoken to a servant or a friend. And somewhere in the 7th year, according to the girl herself, she had stopped fighting. I tried to run at first, the princess said, her voice soft and even. I screamed. I clawed at the glass until my fingers bled. But the labyrinth does not care about your fear. It only cares about your guilt. Every corridor shows you who you really are, and eventually there is nothing left to run from. You just sit, and you let the glass show you. And after enough time, you start to understand. Selene knelt beside her. Understand what? The princess turned to look at her. Her eyes were the color of old glass themselves, pale green, depthless, ancient. That the labyrinth is not a prison. It is a confessional. The only way out is not to fight the reflection. It is to accept that the reflection is you. All of it. The cruelty, the cowardice, the failures. The labyrinth does not let you leave until you can look at the worst version of yourself and say, yes, I was that person, and I will carry that person with me always, and I will be better because of it. Selene looked down at her own hands. She had spent 35 years running from the girl who had not held her father's hand as he died, the woman who had left a child to burn, the cartographer who had arrived too late to hear her mentor's last words. She had mapped the world to avoid mapping herself. Do you want to leave? Selene asked. The princess smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. I have been waiting 7 years for someone to come who could ask me that question without crying. They walked out together, the cartographer and the heir, through corridors that still reflected their sins but no longer held them prisoner. The glass still showed Selene's failures, but now she looked at them and felt not shame but recognition. These were her ghosts. She had made them. She would carry them always, and she would be better because she carried them. At the final arch, the glass showed her one last image, herself as she was now, 35, with tired eyes and calloused fingers, a woman who had finally learned that some maps cannot be drawn with ink. Beside her stood the princess, 14 years old and already wiser than most would ever be. The queen was waiting outside, bent with age and grief and hope. When she saw her daughter, she did not speak. She simply fell to her knees and pressed her forehead to the cold earth. Selene looked back at the labyrinth one last time. The glass walls caught the eternal twilight of the veiled reach and scattered it into 1,000 colors, beautiful and terrible and utterly, perfectly true. She had mapped 100 forgotten roads. She had charted the bones of 3 dead kingdoms. But this was the first map she had ever drawn of herself, and it was, she understood at last, the only one that had ever mattered.